Good afternoon, everyone, or whenever you happen to be watching this, maybe it's evening or morning. Today we're going to be talking about planning sheets, or an introduction to planning, planning basics, all along that line. Planning is going to be a big part of your time here at SI. Um, as a facilitator, it's probably about 30 to 40% of your job, I would say. It takes about the same amount of time that sessions do. So it's definitely a very important part of your job. Today we're going to be going through that, talking you through what planning sheets are, why we do them, why they're important, what the expectations are for planning sheets, all that kind of stuff. So you should be ready to go to attempt your first planning sheet by the end of this presentation, as that'll kind of get started around your first or second week. So it'll be towards the beginning of your job and all the way to the very end. For my returners here, I know y'all are required to watch this video as well, and you may be kind of eye rolling, saying, "Oh, I already know how to do planning." And yes, that is true. But I want to mention that we actually made some pretty big changes to the planning sheet itself, and some of our expectations and goals for planning and that kind of stuff. So you definitely want to pay attention to this video, maybe even take some notes. Because there are some significant changes, and I want y'all to be aware of those going into this semester. And speaking of notes, I recommend everyone, new and returner, have some kind of notepad and pencil or technology out to take notes, because there's going to be a lot of good information here. And I don't want you to have to rewatch the whole video and listen to my whole spiel for some of the good points that you can write down. So yeah, with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the big question is, why do we plan? It's always good to know the why behind why we do these things and why we put effort in behind it. Because, like I said, planning is a big part of what we do, and it's a very you'll turn in lots of planning sheets. So sometimes people kind of get tired of that. So it's good to know the why behind why we do it, and what motivates us to do that. So the biggest reason, of course, is to be prepared for your sessions. Preparation really is the key to success when it comes to sessions. You'll notice there's kind of a correlation between, bad planning sheets and not so good sessions, and really good planning sheets with really good sessions. And that's because, the time and effort that goes into making those planning sheets reflects in session greatly. Secondly, creative, detailed, and well thought out planning helps students to retain information more effectively. So anytime your session is, fun, and you're using different learning styles, and you're grouping up students in different ways, and you're not just working on worksheets the whole time or talking the whole time, that's always going to engage students the most. So you want to make sure that you're planning with the goal in mind, that you're trying to engage students, you're trying to get them to keep coming back, and them to pay attention to the material and really get something out of it. Same thing goes for not just making it fun, but with being prepared. If, let's just say, you're running a math session and you picked a few problems out of the textbook, but you didn't take the time to work out those answers, and you kind of just went into session and you started working out those problems. Well, you get to a point where you're like, oh, well, I don't really remember what the answer was for that, and maybe you try working it out and you can't remember what the answer was, you can't get to the answer, and neither can the students. And that's, it's a lack of preparation on the facilitator's part, and that can lead to students getting confused, or, they don't come back because they maybe think, well, it's kind of a waste of my time, she doesn't even have the answer. So always making sure that you have answers to problems that you're doing, like if you do a quiz or a worksheet, making sure you worked out the answers, or that you actually planned material and you don't just come into session, like, hey, what do you guys want to do? Like, that's not something that you want to be doing. Always being prepared, making creative, fun sessions, and working out all of the stuff and being prepared with all of your materials. Third, it makes your job easier during session. So again, like I explained with the math scenario, if you already had your problems worked out ahead of time, you're not going to be having to be in session trying to work out this problem while assisting students and all of that stuff. You already have it ready to go going into session, and you know you have the answers there in your planning sheet. Same with planning for things like the 3 elements and just planning your activities well in general, like knowing, okay, well, if I have 1 student or if I have 10 students, either way, I'm going to know what to do going in because I wrote it down in my planning sheet. You always want to be prepared for really any scenario that's thrown at you. You know, you don't have to plan for crazy things, but you want to be prepared for common situations and kind of write down a plan for that. You know, for example, if you're doing like if one of your planned activities was like a snowball fight where you're having them write down questions and ball them up and throw the paper across the room, you know, what do you do if 1 student comes? Having some kind of backup plan for that and writing that down. All of those things that I mentioned is why planning makes your job easier, is so you're not in session panicking, and you know, not having a plan when things come up, or just being generally unprepared. So no surprises, and makes your job much easier. Fourth is the content drives instructions. So beginning with an end goal in mind. So by content, I mean, let's just say if you're doing chemistry, chemistry is your content. Or if you're in a session, it might be like a smaller topic, like maybe you're talking about elements or the periodic table or electrons. So that would be your content. And so content driving instruction really means that, like, in your session, it's not the activities, it's not the CLTs or the elements that's driving that. It's what are you trying to get your students to learn. So that's where planning comes in. You know, having your content ready to go, all of your resources prepared, that really drives your session, and having all of that stuff good to go. All right, so as far as expectations, time-wise, your plan is going to match how long your session is. So most of you are going to be at 2 sessions per week, 50 minutes each, meaning that you're going to be required to plan 2 hours each week. So 1 hour for each session. That's a good rule of thumb. Pretty much per session or per 50-minute session, it's an hour, and most of you will have 2, so that's 2 hours. Some of you may have either longer sessions or more sessions per week, but that's more of a rare scenario. But let's just say if you were to have, like, let's say 3 sessions per week, and those were 50 minutes, and that would be 3 hours. Or same if it was like a 2-hour session, that would be 2 hours of planning, which you might experience when you do review sessions towards the end of the semester, but that's not something you need to worry about right now. But in general, about 2 hours per week for each of you. This time is paid. So those 2 hours are not just, you know, we're telling you you got to work off the clock. No, you will be paid for those 2 hours. And you will claim that on your on your hours log each week for planning. And this is not like a specific time that you have to do it each week. It's just kind of when you can. Some people, for example, they like to do all their planning on the weekend. They do it for all their sessions on like Saturday or Sunday. They just go ahead and get them out of the way for the week. Some people wait till the very last minute. They do it like the night before, or the afternoon before. And then you have others who, you know, do it at various different times. But it really is up to you when you do that planning. As long as it is 24 hours before your session. So no later than 24 hours before your session. So if your session is Wednesday morning, that planning needs to be like Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening at the very latest. So it should never be the same day as your session when you're turning in planning. Only like absolute emergencies or something happened where that should be going on. But for a rule of thumb, regular basis, that it should be 24 hours or the day before at least. So again, back to time that you're spending on your planning. If you find that you're taking significantly more time or less time than that like hour per session rule, you need to go ahead and connect with a mentor or reach out to them and get individualized help with that. Um, Usually, if it's, if you're planning it less time, let's say it's taking you like 20 minutes to do your planning sheet, you're probably not doing enough. And if you are taking way longer, let's say it's taking you 2 or 3 hours to plan for one session, and that's what we see more common. Um, that's also something you want to talk to a mentor about because it's is not necessarily time that you can claim. So we don't want you working longer than like what you're claiming for planning. So it's definitely something you want to get help with, and it's just so it's not taking that much time. You should not be spending like 6 hours on planning a week. That is not. We do not want you making that time commitment or putting yourself through that. And there's ways that we can help you get that time down while still meeting the requirements. So yeah, reach out to somebody, especially me. I can definitely help you with that. Oh, I just realized I didn't introduce myself in the beginning. It's Valerie. I'm a senior mentor with SI. So you'll see a lot of me during training, but you can always come up to me and ask about anything to do with planning or really any other SI related thing as well. All right. So as continuing with expectations. So your planning should be adequately filled out and meet some of the expectations we're going to walk through in the video today. So outside of this PowerPoint, we're actually going to pull up a planning sheet and walk you through it. So you will be able to see kind of what's expected and what you need to be putting in each box. So hopefully by the end of this, you feel confident with that. And again, you can always reach out if you have questions about that, as it is a learning process, and you will be learning, especially those first few weeks, how to do a planning sheet and making some changes and stuff like that. Oh, and as far as where you submit planning sheets, those will be on UNG Connect. So you'll go to the group page, like surveys and forms, and then it'll be planning sheet for fall 2022. That is where you'll submit it every single time. You will not submit it via like Word doc or be emailing your mentors or anything like that. Always will be through UNG Connect. And I believe you might have gotten some training on that with the UNG Connect video. But again, if you have confusions about that or you're not sure where it is, someone will be happy to show you where to find that. All right, so as far as basics go, again, I know y'all have probably had some training or seen some videos about, session basics and CLCs and stuff like that. We're going to go over some of the small things that you need to know for planning, so some of this may be a review. So first of all, you will need to plan an opening, main 1, main 2, and a closing. That is not optional. Every single planning sheet will have those 4 things. So for 15-minute sessions, your openings and closings are 10 minutes each, and then your main activities are 15 minutes each. Without getting into too much detail, your opening should kind of be warming your students up a little bit, getting them ready to dive into the material deeper, but, still kind of staying on that surface level. It can be review, that kind of stuff. And then you will move into your main activities, which will be the bulk of the content. So for math or chemistry, maybe this will be like working out actual problems, or getting into like the textbook and pulling problems out of the homework or stuff like that. And then your closing will be a little check for like a final check for understanding and review of everything you did in the session, and just doing that final check to make sure everyone's good, and that it's all the students at least retained something from the session, and you can kind of gauge maybe things that they still missed. You should never be introducing new material in the closing. It should always be a review of either like your opening or your main 1 and 2 stuff you did there. There is an optional main 3 that you will see on your planning sheet. Again, optional, there's a few scenarios where you might want to use the main 3. If you have longer sessions, so I mentioned earlier, test review sessions, those are ones that you will schedule if you want. And final review sessions, you won't experience that until the end of the semester, or if you're a returner, you know what I'm talking about. So that is for longer sessions, or if you end up being, if you request to have longer session times, let's say your sessions are now like an hour and 15 minutes, you opted to have that option, um, then you may want to make use of the main three. But for normal 50-minute sessions that are twice a week, you will most likely not be using the main three. Another scenario where you might use the main three is if you do um, 3 10-minute main activities. So normally the main 1 and 2 are 15 minutes, but if you want to just chop 5 minutes off of both of those and make a third main 3, and just do 3 10-minute activities, that is also an option. Most people don't like to do this, just because it's more planning, and a lot of times people want more time for their main activities anyways. So it's not a super popular option, but it does happen, and it is an option that is available to you. And then third, you can also use the main three as a backup activity in case yours don't work. So I've seen some facilitators, they kind of want to try a new activity, but they're not sure if it's going to work. It's something kind of complicated, or they need a lot of students to show up for it to happen. They'll plan a main three as a backup in case that activity doesn't work, or like that number of students doesn't show up. So they have something there available. Or even I've seen people like plan it but then use it in their next planning sheet. So the third is kind of a fluid option there for you to kind of add any extra stuff if you need to, or an extra activity if you'd like. Another rule that you need to be aware of is regarding resources. So on your planning sheet, there will be like a little upload button after each activity, and at the very end of your planning sheet as well. This space is to upload really anything that is needed for your session. So that might look like some facilitators like to create a full PowerPoint that is like a highlight of their session. So it's like their opening and their main and their closing, and it has all their content on there, everything. So they're kind of just flipping through, and they have it projected on the board so that students can see. So that is something you would attach if you were doing that. There's also like if you have any kind of worksheet, if you have answer keys in any problem that you're going to be using, whether you're pulling it from the textbook, lecture notes, something from the internet, you need to upload a picture of those, and worked out answers for all of them. Every resource needs an answer key. So as a general rule, it's very likely that you will have a resource, at least one, for a session. If you don't have resources for your session at all, like not even one, it's a little strange. There are some cases where it can happen, the activities just happen to not need resources. But as a general rule, you're probably going to need at least one. And if you're regularly not using resources, that's kind of something that you may want to look into, or you might speak with a mentor about how you can use resources, and maybe like prepare a little bit better. So again, any kind of like quizzes, if you have a list of terms that you're going to be using, let's just say you're playing like Taboo or something, that is something you would upload. And you'll see the space. I'll show it to you on the planning sheet where you can do that. But yes, resources. I cannot stress it enough. That is something that you will need to be adding to your planning sheet. Don't forget about CLTs. I know y'all already had a video on CLTs, so I'm not going to get too in depth with the CLTs and explaining each one. But yes, that is a big part of planning, and you need to plan your activities around what CLTs you're going to be using. So sometimes the activities will look different depending on what CLT you are using. And it's very important to know the difference between them and use a variety of them as well. always plan for multiple scenarios. So again, you will see this on the planning sheet, but I'll show you kind of what's expected to, how you need to explain the activity, but you also need to make sure that you're planning not only just for the basic activity, but kind of what if situations. Like if you have an online student, for example, or if you happen to have one student, like let's say it's a partner activity, what do you do if one student is coming in and that's the only student for the day? So you need to plan for that, for example, or if a large group happens to show up. All that stuff is stuff that you need to plan for. All right, so now let's take a look at an actual planning sheet. All right, so this will be the general view of what you see when you first open a planning sheet. So you'll have this first page where you just put in general information. So you'll put your full name right here. And then the second box will be whichever course you facilitate for. There's a few examples here. Also, I forgot to mention in the name box, please put whatever your preferred name is, because sometimes I know the actual planning sheet itself uses your legal name because it's through like UNG Connect and all that. But if you have a preferred name, always put that in your facilitator name box so that we know what to call you if we're doing a debrief, all that kind of stuff. All right, so for the course, it's not a huge deal what format you decide to use, whether you'd like to say, for example, like college algebra or chemistry 1, or if you'd like to use the kind of advisor codes like Chem 1212 or 1211 or Bio 1107. Either is acceptable as long as you indicate what course it is. Try to be as specific as possible. If it's psychology, say intro to psychology or quantitative methods, or be specific with what course it is, but it doesn't matter too much the format that you use. Your instructor. So yes, we have Dr. Englishman teaching chemistry. That's ironic. But you put your instructor, professor if you don't know if they're doctor, but you can just put their last name as well if you want. With the date section, this one, the format is kind of important. As long as you have the actual date, so month and day, the day of the week, so Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then the time, you're pretty much good to go. It doesn't really matter the order, if you want to put 11 o'clock first and then Tuesday, or order doesn't matter too much, but you do need those 3 things because that helps us out a lot when we're checking submission days and times and trying to line your planning sheets up with the session that was for. All right, next I want to talk about session goals and objectives. So this is an overall statement of what do you want to accomplish in this session. So you can kind of see an example here of in the bold section, unacceptable is just review chapter 4. You need to be specific to where somebody that is not in your discipline or class would know kind of what you're talking about. So we may not know exactly what you mean if in case we haven't taken these courses, but at least if we know the subject material, like you can see here, the facilitator has put gas laws. So Charles' law, Avogadro's law, Boyle's law. So even if I don't know chemistry, I can at least tell the students, this is what we're going to be learning today, or this is, you can articulate, because chapter 4 can be kind of ambiguous, depending if you're using a different textbook or you're doing something different. So you can mention, the chapter numbers, and you can mention like that, as long as you put kind of a disclaimer of like, that includes topics of such and such, or meaning learning theories, or something like that says that's what you're going to be working on. I also kind of like to mention, where are they with the content? Is this something that's new to them? Is it something that they're having a test on it tomorrow, so they should be like good to go. They should be just reviewing and not really learning or being confused on a whole lot of things, and maybe just clarifying some small things. So I like to mention that, and maybe how deep we're going to be diving into the material. Um, are we going to kind of be surface level? Are we going to be really working out problems and getting to answers? Depending on what kind of subject you're in. Um, if it was English, maybe you could mention like, okay, is this a book that they just started? Have they been working on it for a while? Did they just get this poem? Have they been analyzing it for weeks? Or where are they at in their paper? Are they in the brainstorming stage, or are they in the like final draft stage? So that might be something that you want to mention when you're doing this box as well. But just generally, what is your goal for this session? What do you want students to be able to do once this session is done? You want them to be able to fully work out a problem on their own, and the content that you're going to be covering. So that's what is expected for this box. So all of that will be the first page, just sort of like a little intro before you get your planning sheet started. Next after that, you will see the opening as the first thing that you plan. So generally this format is going to be the same for all of your activities. It's just going to say like opening, main, and then closing, but the boxes will be the same for each activity. So the first box that you will come across is content. This is what is the subject / specific topic that you're covering. So we know from the intro page that's going to be gas laws. What would not be acceptable here is like, chemistry or English. You don't want to be just saying the general subject that you are in. You want to be specific with what that activity is about. So maybe you're talking about, classic conditioning and psychology, or you're talking about, oh gosh, I started trying to think of something for math, and my brain kind of like short circuited a little. Maybe you're talking about sine, cosine, and tangent in math, so you want to be specific with that. So all of that will be what you put here, and it'll be just the content for that one activity. It doesn't have to be for the whole session. Then the second box here is the learning strategy, and in parentheses, that's the activity name. We call it the learning strategy, but I know that can be a bit confusing for some that may be new. So that is also known as the activity name. If your activity already has a name, it's something common like Jeopardy or Kahoot, or maybe you got it from the booklet or the manual, so it already has a name like Brain Dump. If it's something you came up with, you can just name it yourself. If it's like a PowerPoint review or a matching game or two truths and a lie, like, whatever you want to call it, as long as you just give a short 2 to 3 word name for your activity, that is fine, just so we kind of know what we're looking at. Next, you're going to be selecting your CLT for that activity. So in this case, it was a group discussion for a matching game. Again, CLTs, you'll need to be aware of kind of what they are. So if you need to go back and rewatch that video or look at some notes that you have, make sure you know the difference between them. I know some of them are a little confusing, so you may have some questions on the differences between a few of them, and that's perfectly fine. But as long as you have a general idea of kind of what they are, and some that you want to start trying out, that's a good start to have. And you want to, again, maybe start with a few that you know and then branch out from there, but definitely not using the same ones over and over and over again. All right, so the next box is going to be the bulk of your information. So fully describe the plan for your learning strategy and how you will incorporate that with your chosen CLT and content. So this box is essentially just a combination of, based on your content, which in this case is your gas laws, and you chose group discussion as your CLT. How is that activity, the matching game, going to fit into your CLT and your content? What are you going to have the students be doing? It's essentially describe the activity. What's the plan for this opening 10 minutes? So it's a combination of these first three boxes, really: your content, your learning strategy or activity name, and your CLT. So for this, I'm actually going to switch to this. It's the same form, just in a different format. I apologize, just so you can read the full thing. But this is the same form. So here you can see a kind of an example here. So she explains, I've written down the names, definitions, and formulas for each of the gas laws that we've covered so far, each on an individual note card. And then she's going to have the students work together to match the name, formula, and definition for each gas law together. And then they will try to do it without notes, but they can use the notes if they need. And then she mentions her plan for if there's one student, it can work as normal, and she can kind of help out if the student gets stuck. She mentions her online students. So for some of you, this may not be the case. I'm not completely sure yet if we are doing an online or dual modality type of thing. But if we are not, then do not worry about this, doing the online students. But if you are an online facilitator, for example, that might be of interest to you. But yeah, you see she mentions what she's going to do for online students, and then how they will participate. And she doesn't really mention in the case of like a lot of students, which is fine because this activity is kind of implied that it works for a large group of students. Like that doesn't really matter, so you don't really have to mention that. So she gave a breakdown of what the activity was going to be, how it was going to play out in session. She mentioned what content she was going to be using, like how that was going to be factored into the activity, and how the students were going to collaborate, and then adapting to various scenarios. The next box you'll notice is one of the three elements. So checking for understanding. It asks you how you will check for your students' understanding. In this case, the facilitator said, I'll ask my students how the formulas make sense given the definitions and what it means to have standard temp, standard pressure, etc. And also ask questions like, what is R? How are Boyle's laws and Charles' laws different? So you can see that she wrote out specific questions and also concepts to connect to make sure that her students actually understood the gas laws, their formulas and definitions, essentially the content that she was covering in this activity. And there's multiple ways to check for understanding, but this is just a good example for an opening. Also, I want to point out pretty much every box on the planning sheet has a little notes underneath. These are just guidelines for what is expected for that box, and it can give you some good pointers if you're confused about what goes there. And it also kind of usually says what not to do. So definitely pay attention to these notes, because they're there for a reason, and they're there to help you out in case you get stuck. Actually, I'm going to go back to the planning sheet for this one. Okay. So the next box you're going to encounter is what material will you be redirecting to. This is really just asking you, like, okay, if you have 2 students in session, and let's say, like, you ask one student, oh, what's the answer to this? Or what's the answer to this problem? And they're like, well, I don't know. And so maybe you try to redirect, and you're like, oh, okay, well, to the other student, Susie, what do you think? And Susie doesn't know either. So both of these students are kind of staring at you, and they don't know the answer, and you've kind of exhausted your options. So where at that point are you going to direct them? Is there a primary source like the textbook, for example, or a specific part of the lecture PowerPoints online, or something from the homework? Maybe you want to refer them to a homework problem that they had. Just essentially, where are you directing them? It doesn't have to be super extremely specific. It doesn't have to be like line 3 on page 5 of, it doesn't have to be that, but just generally, like, if someone were to come in and run your session, they can tell students like, hey, check chapter 10 of your textbook, or check homework number 6, and there might be a problem on there that can help you. So anytime you want to put something there that's saying, where are you going to be redirecting to, it's a great thing to have prepared and ready to go. So the next thing that you're going to be looking at is your learning preferences box. That will be which learning preference you think that this activity is covering. Again, you should have already had some kind of training or review on what the learning preferences are. If not, you will have it at some point in the next couple days. So those are visual, auditory, read, write, and kinesthetic. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory. Visual is going to be stuff with like colors or diagrams, videos, all that kind of stuff. Auditory is listening, talking, discussion. Reading and writing is reading and writing of any kind, using words and numbers for the most part. And then kinesthetic being like hands-on and active stuff. So you select kind of which one you think fits your activity, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Some of them fit under multiple learning preferences, and really it's not something that you're gonna get in trouble if you use the wrong one. So you just kind of do the best that you can, choosing which one you think fits your activity that you made. So in this case is reading and writing. Then you get an estimated time. Generally, these are going to be the same for all of your planning sheets. So 10 minutes for an opening, that's very standard. Sometimes it's like 8 minutes or, 11, 12 minutes, but it's best to just stick to 10 minutes. Apologize if you can hear my dogs in the background. The next part that we're going to be talking about is relevant links and URLs. So let's just say you made a Kahoot and you need somewhere to paste the link so that you can click on it in session, or whoever's looking at your planning sheet can have access to that. This is where you would put that. That's optional. It's only if you have some kind of link that you need to be using, a Quizlet or Jeopardy. I'm trying to think if there's like a specific website. Like sometimes I've seen chemistry use like a specific periodic table. Sometimes they want to put that link in there. It's a link to like the periodic table website. Anything that the students are going to be using that happens to be like an URL form, you can go ahead and paste that here. This is the upload file for resources that I was talking about. You will have 2 under each activity, one for the resource, one for the answer key. If you need more space, there will be a page at the end of the planning sheet with additional room for uploads. But overall, you should only need the 2. So you can see here for this activity, she uploaded a terms and definitions thing, which I believe has formulas as well. So she made sure that not only did she explain the activity, but she made sure that the name, formula, and definition was written out somewhere and attached to her planning sheet. Doesn't really need an answer key if it's already in the right order, so she's good to go with this one. So next we'll be looking at our main activity. So this should look very similar to your opening. It's not terribly different. The first thing you've got is your content. So now we're working on, instead of gas law as a concept, we're working on actual gas law problems. Even if you just had gas law for all of the boxes, that's kind of okay in this case. But if you're covering any kind of different content, make sure you're specific with it. Like I know, for example, sometimes in psychology, they'll do a session over like the learning chapter, so it might be different types of learning. So sometimes the opening is like modeling behavior, and then maybe the main activity is like classical conditioning, and then the main two is like operant conditioning. So just being like that's where you would indicate that of what content you're moving to that's different. But if it's the same, you can just put the same thing, like gas law for all of them, if that happens to be the only subject that you're working on. So the name for this one was Pass the Marker. I believe this is an activity that she kind of came up or modified based off of another activity that already exists. So yeah, feel free to name these activities something that you want to name them, if it fits the actual activity. Assigned discussion leader was selected as the CLT here. And I'll move to the other planning sheet so you can see the full text for the main one. All right, yeah. So she said she attached a worksheet of a gas law practice problems, and she's going to project that on the board. She mentioned what problems they're going to work on, and that she'll have students work through one section of the problem at a time, starting with one student who will do the first part, and then they will be passing the marker to the next student to do the next part, and so on. So she mentions how she's getting her students to work together. They're passing it along and each discussing their part. So she allows students to discuss and help each other with their steps. They may use notes if they are confused. So she mentions, like, what restrictions are there on what resources they can access. If this might be right before an exam, maybe you want to tell them, like, oh, no notes. Let's just see what we can do. If this is like the first day that they're being exposed to this material, then maybe you want to mention, like, hey, this is the first time them seeing this, so they have full access to notes and Google and their homework and all that stuff. So that's something you may want to mention when you're planning out your activities. And she makes kind of a note to herself here. Don't let this activity run over time. Make sure they have plenty of time for the main two. And that might be something, maybe she struggles like with time management. So she's leaving like a note for herself saying, like, make sure we get through this activity in the right amount of time. Maybe she sets a timer for herself, because she knows main two, maybe it's on the test or something, like problems from the main two. And then she mentions, if there's only one student, they can work through the full problem, but we will keep it stepwise, and I will ask questions at each step and check for understanding between steps. And again, she mentions online students. That may not be something that y'all have to do, but it is cool to see how she has prepared for multiple scenarios here. Also, I don't know if you've noticed as well, but several CLTs could apply to this. So depending on how you decide to do your activity, multiple CLTs could work. So it's not like one right answer where, oh, I got to pick the right CLT. It really is that the CLT can change how the activity looks. So if you wanted to, maybe you wanted to do this in partners. So if you had 4 students, it's just 2 students split off and they're passing the problem between themselves, but in separate groups. Or maybe you want to do a think, pair, share, where they do one problem by themselves, then they do one with a partner, and then they share with the group and do like maybe a group problem. Same with like a group survey. This could kind of be considered a group survey. So yeah, never feel like, it can only be one CLT, or you got to find out which one it is and what's the right answer, because it really depends on how you explain it and how you're getting the students to work together. That's more important. And then let's take a look at her check for understanding here. She says, I'll ask students to work together to explain how they solved the problem, how did the steps fit together in the overall process of the problem, and ask them to explain their answer if it makes sense logically. So she wrote down some questions that she has for them, and what she's going to ask them during this process and while they're working out the problems, to check and see if they really understood and they really grasped the concept here. And then she mentions, yeah, I'm going to be redirecting to chapter 10 of the textbook and homework from Thursday's class. Auditory was the selected learning preference for this activity, so there's a lot of discussion happening. Definitely counts. It could also maybe count as read write because you have students working out problems. You could kind of argue visual as well. That they are visually seeing the steps of the problem. So again, could be several things. She's chosen 15 minutes for her main one. That's the perfect amount of time. I know we discussed you can do like maybe 3 main activities where you do 10 minutes for each one, but it's more common that you just have 10 for an opening, 15 minutes for your main 1 and 2, and 10 minutes for your closing. Okay, no URLs for this activity, but you can see she has uploaded the problems that she's going to be using and the answer key here. So we have a copy of all of that stuff and it's good to go for the activity. This activity would not be acceptable if it was just this text. So you have got to have, if you say you're going to have a worksheet or practice problems or terms or something, that needs to be uploaded right here so that we can see what you mean and we can see that you planned that. So there is not a main 2 activity here because I pulled this from another planning sheet and I didn't want to have to go through another one with you and it's exactly the same thing. Your main 2 will look just like your main 1 except it will be a different activity. So it might be a little Jeopardy, or it might be maybe a memory game, or fill in the blank or something like that. Some kind of activity like that will be just like your main 1, exact same format. You explain what your activity is, your checks for understanding. You need to upload your materials. But yeah, exactly the same. So let's go ahead and, oh yes, you will see your main 3 here as well. Again, the main 3 is optional, so it'll be on your planning sheet every single time, but you can pretty much completely ignore it if you don't plan on using it. So, opening, main 1, main 2, closing required. Main 3, you can skip if you're not using it. Alright, so let's look at our closing. Again, same format. It won't be anything different. What's in the boxes is going to be a little different, but same format. So it shouldn't be too terribly hard once you get that first activity done. Most every activity you'll plan after that will look kind of similar as far as filling out the boxes. So we have here is the content, a review of the understanding of gas laws. Perfect. So that is what we did in this session today. We looked at gas laws, and we need to be reviewing those for our closing as a final check for understanding. No new material in the closing. There will never be a new topic or a new thing really to discuss. It should be a review of anything that happened in your opening, main 1, main 2. And then the name here of the activity, 2 truths and 1 lie. Perfect. And then the CLT, we can see she chose think, pair, share. All right, I'll switch over so you can see the full text. Alrighty, so she said, on their own, students will come up with 2 truths and 1 lie regarding the content we covered in session today. They will then get with a partner and try to guess each other's lie statement. If we have extra time, we can do 2 rounds, meaning, students will come up with another 2 truths and a lie if they have time. And that's good that she said that because, you always have the case where sometimes students are very slow, maybe they haven't gone to class in the last few days, or maybe they're feeling kind of tired, or they've been studying a lot. So maybe they're not as prepared as they need to be for session. And it takes them a long time to get through that one set of truths and lies. Or oppositely, sometimes you have students that are just ready to go. They have been reviewing for the past few days. They've been going to class every day, staying on top of everything. And they just get through it super fast. So she has a plan in case they get through it super fast. After we're done, everybody will share with the class as a group their answers. If there's only one student, I will be their partner for the activity. If there are uneven numbers, then maybe there'll be a group of 3. So great planning and adapting to various scenarios here. She mentions if there's only one student that she's going to partner up with them. And then if there's uneven numbers, since they're doing pairs, she might make a group of 3 or maybe join in on one of those. And then the think, pair, share is explained because we say students are coming up with the statements on their own, then they get with a partner, then they share with the group. So the CLT is here, content is here, and the activity is fully explained with adapting to various scenarios and situations too. All right, so let's see how she checks for understanding. So I will check for understanding by having the students also correct their partner's lie statement into a truthful statement so that they can prove they aren't just guessing and they actually know why it's wrong. So maybe you have a student that's just like, oh, I think that one's the lie. Why? Oh, I don't know. So you got to make sure that you are actually checking for understanding. So you might ask them, oh, so can you correct this lie statement into a truth? And they say, well, actually, no, I can't. Or maybe they say, yeah, I know why it's a lie. And then they say, like, okay, they modify the statement to make it true now. That's a great way to check for understanding. Sometimes I call them mini activities, or it's built into the activity as a check for understanding. Those take a little bit more brain power or creativity, I will say. It doesn't always work for every activity, but there's some activities where you can kind of see, like, oh, I can build something into this activity that will act as a check for understanding, and I can mention that in the box, or I can make something that will be a check for understanding in this activity. Like maybe if students have to present like a little topic to the group, maybe you have their peers ask them questions and then they have to answer those questions, or you have some kind of little quiz at the end or something. So all that stuff is good. Or if you just want to do kind of what happened in the other activities where you saw she listed out some questions to ask them, that's always good as check for understanding as well. Excuse me. So redirecting to, you see she mentions the specific lecture slides, 20 to 45, so that's a good 25 slides to look at. So not too specific, but just a general area, or maybe she would say like lecture slides or lecture PowerPoint chapter 13. Maybe it's like a whole PowerPoint. Or chapter 10 of the textbook, like you can see here, or several sources. Reading and writing was selected as the learning preference here. 10 minutes for the closing activity, that is appropriate. And see, for this one, she didn't need resources. It's 2 truths and a lie. The students are coming up with the statements and the lies, and there's not a whole lot that needs to be prepared on the side of the facilitator. So in this case, it's acceptable. She doesn't really have any resources for this activity. This is a separate page. Here, I'll show you kind of what that looks like. Yeah, so you will see this will be a separate page where you have a space to upload any extra resources in case the 2 boxes for each wasn't like enough, or maybe one activity had 3, or you have a PowerPoint for like the whole session that you want to put here. This is where you would put that, so there's some extra space there to upload resources. And that is pretty much everything. So this, your planning sheet will look almost exactly like this. It may be in page format. So this first part right here, for example, would be page 1, and then you would press like this button would say next instead of resubmit. And then you would have the page for your opening activity. And then the next page would be the main activity number 1. So it may be in page format, but it will look like this as far as boxes with the spaces here to write out and the upload file sections too. Your first week of planning, if you're new, you may be planning with a mentor. Depending, I'm not sure if we have quite enough mentors to go around this semester to get every single person. So you may be in groups instead of individual, but you will have help with your first planning sheet. It's not going to be something you just have to completely do on your own. And at the very least, you'll be able to request if you need to meet with somebody for those first few planning sheets to get some help. Even if you're not struggling with the actual like boxes, like knowing what goes in each box, but instead maybe you're struggling to come up with content for your subject or what activities to do for your subject. Maybe you're struggling with what CLTs to choose. Really anything that goes on this planning sheet, it is totally okay to reach out for help and ask, especially those first few weeks, to see who, like if a mentor can help you out and get it figured out, activity ideas you can do, or troubleshooting with anything on the planning sheet that you need. All right, yeah, so this has been a review of planning. You may get some additional review, I believe, on day 2 of training, where we'll talk about planning a little bit more. But this is the main bulk of your training on planning, other than meetings you may have with mentors about it. So I encourage, if you didn't take notes or if you want to go back to specific parts and take notes, feel free to do that and use this video as a resource as well, because you may want to go back throughout the semester and look and get some clarification on things. But yeah, if you have any questions, just let me know. You can always email me or any other mentor and get help with planning. And good luck, everyone.